This program describes the real beginning of the end, the signs that are all around us, and that the Lord discussed on the Mount of Olives the day the disciples said, "What are the signs of thy coming in the end of the world?" We're going to discuss that in the location portion of the program. When we go on location in Israel, we're going to discuss a question of degree or intensity of signs. Some people have said they always were here, yes, but things like famine and pestilence, they are worse than ever today. The false Christs are abounding. The false messiahs of Israel, Bar Kokhba and Sabbatheel, they were 1,500 years apart. We have simultaneous false Christs around us now, and we all know it. We'll deal with the other signs when we go on location. Let me just say this. This is a good generation to be the last. And by that I mean considering that Israel's back in the land, that Russia is threatening expansion toward the Middle East, that Persia and Libya have become powerful enemies of Israel. Ethiopia has changed hands. There's so many things I could say, but and on the other side of the picture, the ruination of the environment, the earthquakes that we're having. I'm going to cover it in the body of the program, but suffice it to say, everyone should think about that. There is a generation that is the last one, according to biblical prophecy. This may well be it. You're going to see some rare footage, too. We were able to shoot on a kibbutz and shot bomb shelters there, which they decorate for the children. I'm going to tell you about it on the program. And the hill we shot on was important. Southern approach to Jerusalem was important in 67 and 48 wars, and even in the time of King David. Our offers, and I'll tell you how to get them later, the book, The Beginning of the End, which is the text of all that I'm saying. We just made it like a transcript. It contains the maps that we use on the program and so on. We have 2 audio tapes, The Beginning of the End, which has the 5 songs. Each program has special music written for this series, and they will be on the tapes along with a word sheet with the Hebrew translations as usual. And we'll have the videotape, The Beginning of the End, which contains all 5 programs and, of course, everything that we're doing, music, words, and all of the text. If you have a videotape machine, I think this is the way to go. And we'll supply those things to you as usual. I'll give you the details later in the program. Now, we're going to go to location in Israel. We'll be showing you things you haven't seen before. Well, we've come this morning to a military base in the hills of Judea, and I wanted to express that we're looking at the only modern Israeli generation and some of the equipment it needs to survive. You know, this generation idea has gotten into modern Christian theology. The verse from Matthew 24:34 that mentions the word generation has become very popular. It says, "Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled." This is the Lord talking on the Mount of Olives, and he seems to be saying that the generation that sees the things I've been talking about here as I describe the signs of the end is the one to see my coming. Or the generation standing here with me will see these signs. What needs to be said is that the word generation in the Greek, genia, from root genos, does not mean a period of time. The Schofield Bible that I use says the primary definition is race, kind, family, stock, breed of people. A generation in that sense is not a 40-year, 35-year, 30-year period, but a kind of people. And what the Lord was assuring them was this kind of people, the Israelite people, are not going to pass away till all the signs be fulfilled. A necessary thing to say as we now see modern Israel, because it seems to some Israelis, in fact, this nation can't last through what's going on. On the base here, we're being passed by jeeps and trucks who are heading to various fronts to hold this nation together for another generation. And the Christian is saying, well, that's 1948 plus 40 years. That's the end of it. That's a generation. You could argue with it at several grounds. The word generation is not really a period of time, as I just said. Plus, a generation is not necessarily 40 years. In Job 22, at the end of the book of Job, it says Job saw his sons, his grandsons, and his great-grandsons. He lived to survive 140 years, even 4 generations. If you divide 4 generations into 140 years, in that case it comes out 35 years. And if you were starting at 1948, the end should have been in 1983. These kind of theories, these little number games, an arithmetic problem, cannot go against the scripture where the Lord said, no man knows the day or the hour. Only my Father in heaven knows. If it were an arithmetic problem that simple to predict the second coming, I'm sure we would all be packed and ready. There may be a denomination carrying luggage called Packers, you see. It just defeats the idea of the age of faith, which is the age in which we believe in the things not seen. Now, having said all that we have a generation finished in Israel, but it's not necessarily the final generation, I will say that the signs of the end really are all here. The Bible doesn't say to count from some point and compute a final generation. It doesn't say start counting in 1948 and add a number to it, or 1967 when Jerusalem was restored. But it does say that there are signs of the end that anyone should be able to see. When the Lord stood on the Mount of Olives and the disciples came to him privately asking, what are the signs of the end of the age and of your coming? That was the important question. He had just said, see ye all these things, that is the temple. There will not be left here one stone upon another which shall not be thrown down. That interested them very much. If the temple would be destroyed, then Jerusalem is destroyed. If Jerusalem is destroyed, then there is no Hebrew nation. And so naturally, their concern was, what's to happen to us? Now, he answered them in a few verses, and we've said these things before, but it needs to be repeated time and again what the signs of the end are, and compared to the newspaper of today. As we advance through time, we see the signs come on intensely, and it urges us to think the end is very near indeed. When the Lord answered them, he did not speak in parables. He didn't say the kingdom of heaven is like a woman weaving flax or something and leave us pondering. He answered in plain objective terms. The first thing he said is, the false Christs will abound. People will come in my name saying, I am Christ. Oh, we have plenty of it today. We have the Reverend Moons of the world and the Eastern Sheiks, and we have the Lord Maitreya's. We have a New Age movement. You can't tell it from the Old Age movement in Pharaoh's court, but they call it a New Age movement. More brotherhood coming, this time from the other planets, I don't know, energy waves, whatever. Men will go to any lengths to avoid the simple gospel and the statements of the God of Israel about the end and the kingdom and eternity. But the false Christs really are here. He answered them about wars. There will be wars and rumors of wars. It's not just that there are wars. There have always been wars, but that we get the news these days immediately. If there's an incident in the Persian Gulf in the morning at supper time, you have it on television in America with plenty of commentary. That's the rumors of wars, and that's what affects our lives. When we see a ship blow up, we know it might have been us on that ship. When we see a car bomb go off in Beirut, we know it may have been us in that coffee shop, in that hotel, blown to kingdom come for a war we don't understand, a cause that we don't participate in. I'm going to speak about the Russian and the Persian Gulf and what's really going on over there later on, but in passing, I would say we have the kinds of wars now that really point to the end. They're right in God's arena of operations. They concern Persia, Magog, Libya, Ethiopia, and they lead toward a coming Russian invasion of Israel, but more on that later. At this juncture, the Lord said there will be famine. You could argue there's always been famine, but we have a few component parts to the modern famine that make it the worst of all. in Africa, take the people who farm the Sahel, the southern end of the Sahara Desert. They've known how to till that land for 5,000 years with no problems. But when there was drought, they always moved south to get less sandy soil, and they planted there. They knew what to do. But now we've been there. Civilization has armed the people of the south with machine guns, and the people of the desert can't move south now. They're shot down. So the soil is too sandy to plant, the machine guns are impossible to pass, and so they sit down on the ground and die. And there's no help for it. We talk a lot about solving these famines, and indeed we send some food and some money, but we're barely making headway. And on top of it all, we have an overpopulation problem in just the famine areas. The Lord said pestilence. This is one that I've reviewed. For 15 years I've been teaching the signs of the end from Matthew 24. And when I came to pestilence, when I first was teaching, it was Asian flu I spoke of. That was a pestilence that came down on America of the time. Then it was Legionnaire's disease, where great numbers of people were dying in one room because of something in an air conditioning compressor, whatever it was. We invented this disease, but it came upon us, this pestilence. Then it was herpes, and now it's AIDS. I've changed over and over to a more serious pestilence, and now we have one that reminds us again of the courts of Egypt and the plagues of the God of Israel on Pharaoh. The pestilence is advancing just as the Lord said in this age. Then he said earthquakes, famine, pestilence, and earthquakes. The scientists tell us the earthquakes are worse and more often today. And if the Lord was referring to environmental damage in general, my goodness, we're breaking up the ozone layer, putting the dioxin in the soil, we are achieving more than an earthquake can. We're rendering some parts of creation unusable forever when we poison our environment. The saddest part of it is when the Lord said in Matthew 24:8, all these things are just the beginning of sorrows. What we see, the signs I'm speaking of, are the beginning of the end. Now, you know, I have a quotation. These are all biblical. I have quotations from the Jewish wise men of the ages as well. I think you'll be interested in them. It's very interesting what the sages thought. Without reference to Scripture, that is, they never saw the New Testament, of course. They didn't see this organized speech of Jesus Christ exactly lining up the signs. What they had, of course, they were students of the Old Testament, Bible commentators in the Talmud and in the apocryphal books and so on. It's not to be confused with Scripture. These are commentators equal, let's say, to the Dr. Schofield, Dr. Ryrie of our day, the Youngers, the Bakers, the people who study the Bible and reduce it to reference material so we can use it more conveniently. But it's interesting how they commented on the very same subject, speaking in some cases centuries before Christ. The Talmudists state that colossal uprooting, destruction, revolution, and disaster would precede the final redemption. From the Talmud tractate Sanhedrin, 10th chapter, their disputes and discussions have to do with the fact that before there is redemption, there is destruction. And then from the book of the pseudepigrapha, Baruch, on the subject of eschatology, it says the Messianic kingdom comes following a terrible tribulation that will come upon the whole earth. Then a final judgment, and then the Messiah. And this is interesting. The nations will be judged on the basis of how they treated Israel. Now we've moved to a kibbutz near Jerusalem with maybe an unfortunate, maybe a fortunate location. We're on a high hill that commands a view of the West Bank. In fact, in front of me between the trees, I can really see Jordan on a clear day. And this kibbutz was in the way of any attack from the south on Jerusalem. The children were a major concern here, so you see bunkers and bomb shelters, gaily decorated, so they would enjoy it. Actually, children, I think, if you say, well, planes are coming to bomb, let's all go down the tunnel, have a lot of fun. And, well, they might, and Israel has had to assume such a defensive posture with its children for many years in modern Israel and for thousands of years in ancient Israel. They expected an invasion in 1948 and again in 1967, and they pretty much got what they expected, and in both cases, they held this hill. The kibbutz has been here for a long time. It watches the road from Bethlehem to Jerusalem, it watches the Judean desert, and it watches the southern flank of Jerusalem. They've always had to hold the hill against vastly superior forces. This has been the case with Israel all the time. Not since King David has Israel been able to mount an army something like the numerical equal of its invaders, and that's been a problem. Officers often in meetings would say, I don't know if my plan will work. We're outnumbered 20 to 1, and my plan was designed to be outnumbered 12 to 1, things like that. And yet they hang on. It's not that they rush out and cross the border to persecute the next guys. That isn't Israeli style. The Israeli style is to hold the land God gave them. They do not move back 1 inch from its borders. And the controversy over the West Bank and so on, with that sort of mentality, you can see that it's going to lead to some tensions. Well, the defense has been adequate, and it's going to have to be in the upcoming invasion. The Russians are coming. We've talked about it in the scriptures, Ezekiel 38 and 39, the invasion of Gog and Magog. Magog is Russia. Gog is its leader. They come from the north. The northern border is very secure, dotted with bunkers like these, and plenty of plans to meet a large-scale invasion. The Allies include Persia and Libya, especially in the Middle East, as well as what is called Gomer and Togarmah, Eastern Europe, and a southern Russian Cossack territory, and Ethiopia. But I'm interested in Persia and Libya because of what's going in the news now. Now, I want to say that unlike our previous prophecy programs, we're making prophecy show so close up to the events that we are using events from yesterday's newspaper virtually and today's newspaper, and by the time this goes on the air, new developments may have happened, ships may be sunk, armies may march, but I'll take my chances from this point. What's in the news at the moment is very interesting. First, a map of the invasion and pretty much what's going to happen. We have Israel in the center, as usual. Here it is in the center where I've drawn the circle. This is Russia, and they are going to come down primarily from this direction, from the north, and also join Persia, presumably on an eastern flank. And Libya will evidently come by air across the Mediterranean, and a very disconcerting and diverting attack from the south by Ethiopia. Whatever troops they can mount will have to be watched to protect Dimona, the nuclear emplacement in the Negev. And so Israel will be distracted on several fronts, as usual. But this invasion isn't going to succeed. I wanted to make a contrast with Armageddon, which we have on a different program, where I drew some arrows to the Valley of Megiddo, but it's a different invasion 7 years apart. It's handy to have a place to put my map on most locations where we're in Israel. I'm in a desert or something, but here I've got bomb shelters and machine gun emplacements, and I'm standing on tunnels, underground tunnels. There was a tunnel here from a nursery right through to the bomb shelter for the children. And I suppose it may come into use again, but when the Russians invade, you know they're going to lose, and bad. I said in my book, The Cairo Connection, that Russia will attack a nation so mighty and so resolute that Russia will cease to be a world power forever. That nation is Israel. They'll be defensive again, but they'll push the button and they'll use everything they have. Even as we go on the air now, the Russian tankers are being escorted through the Persian Gulf by Iran. That makes a military relationship between Persia and Magog. Iran is trading poison gas for mines with Libya. Gaddafi needs the gas to fight the Chadians in the desert, and Iran is involved in a naval war in the Persian Gulf. 40 Syrian pilots have been spirited over to Libya by Syria, presumably to be the aviators in the coming Russian invasion of Israel. I don't know, but it's very tempting. Does all this bring the Antichrist? Maybe. He'll have his motivation to come to Israel and say, you really need peace. You were lucky this time. But there always is the Chinese, and that, of course, is looking to Armageddon. And does this peace covenant bring the rapture? Hopefully. I would just say this, from where I'm standing in Israel, leaning on a bomb shelter at a kibbutz near Jerusalem, look up. Your redemption draws nigh.
In the days of Israel's childhood, when the prophets spoke the word, They were scorned and they were laughed at, and their message went unheard. Yet they spoke of loving kindness, and their garments did they rend. When the faithful spoke the word of the beginning of the end, in His mercy God was silent, in long suffering did He bend. In His patience did He love them, and He kept them till the end. Through the battles, through the fires, when the chosen had no friend, He wrapped His arms around Mariah, and He kept them till the end. You were unfaithful, Jerusalem, and the flames rose up the hill. But when Mariah was on fire, the God of Israel loved you still. Now look around you, Jerusalem, how the flames rise up your hill, and think of Him who loved you always. In the end, He loves you still. Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim, God loves you still. In His kindness He will rule them, to His mountain He'll descend, and the Savior they rejected will be ruler in the end, and the ones who had no nation, and the ones who had no friend, oh, they will weep for their Messiah when the King comes at the end. Oh, they will weep for their Messiah, Messiah, when the King comes at the end.
Well, that music and dramatization are fully justified. The prophets warned Israel, and they're warning us. You know, America is involved a little bit in the end times, and people have talked about it a lot. When I was on location, I might have drawn in the European. I was concentrating on the Middle East, but Gomer, an ally of Russia, comes down from Eastern Europe in the invasion, could add them there, and that's Eastern Europe's role. With Western Europe, America may well be allied with them in an alliance like NATO in the end. And some people object and they don't like the idea of an America allied with the Antichrist and so on. But really there is an unchristian America and a Christian America. And the way I see it, after the rapture, Christian America is going to be gone. And if you look around your town and see what's left, if you took all of the believers out of the town, you can easily see how the Antichrist would be appealing to these people and how they would be naturally his. There's an America of drugs and materialism and crime and pornography and waste. And They largely will be left behind. Now, of course, some people will be saved in the tribulation period. These are people who will pass the Lord's standard of Matthew 25:40, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of these, the least of my brethren, ye have done it unto me. And intensively this means the Jewish people, Israel. His brethren in the tribulation period will be the 144,000 that are witnessing in his name, 12,000 of each of the 12 tribes of Israel, as it says in Revelation 7:4. And they will need help. We've said this before. They will be hungry. They will be outcasts. They'll be outlaws. They'll be imprisoned. And those who are believers at that time will help them, and because that's what believers do. And they'll be tested on that point. I say Sha'alu Shalom Yerushalayim at the end of every program. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem, because good treatment of the brethren of the Lord is the standard to get into the kingdom for tribulation period believers. Believers now ought to meet these tribulation period minimums, as we have said. Study the end. This is only the beginning. You can study with our offers the book, The Beginning of the End, the 2 audio tapes, simply the sound tape of the program. Both of those for an offer of $10 or more. You get the book, which is a transcript of everything that's said here, and it has the maps and the diagrams that we're using. Or you can get the audio tapes, and the advantage there is they have the music. You can hear the songs that we've done for the program. Nothing wrong with getting both of those, book and tape. Or finally, you can get the video tape, which includes all 5 programs. And look, it'll take us a little bit of time to make that, so it'll allow 3 to 6 weeks for delivery. The videotape will be $50, and I think you'll see that if you have all 5 programs on a tape, it's worth that. So a gift of $50 or more for the videotape, The Beginning of the End. All 3 of these offers are excellent for Bible studies, churches, home meetings. Write into us right away, Box 12268, Dallas, Texas 75225, and Sha'alu Shalom Yerushalayim. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Oh, they will be